This is me and my wife 12 years ago when we got married. And yes, this was the happiest day of my life. And something happened that Julia did not know was going to happen. See, right after this picture was taken, I, like every other married guy on the planet, is taken to a room. And he's presented with two choices. Newly married men can either choose to get really into World War II history or they have to get into barbecue. I chose barbecue. And so me and my wife, we got married, we joined our bank accounts, and then we had one of these awkward conversations where all of a sudden she was seeing how much I was spending on this barbecue hobby that I had. And I had a choice to make. I could either stop forever, which wasn't ever going to work, or I could find a way to make some money with it. So that's what I did. I went to my office and I started selling it, and then all of a sudden I was in business. And my time with the Air Force ended, and then all of a sudden I decided to give this entrepreneurship thing a try. And you can see my mom there on the left in the tent, and that's me on the right with the red hat, and my wife is in the middle there. We even got her to help with some of the barbecue stuff back in the day. And people liked what we did, and we grew, and we grew, and we grew, and then eventually we ended up in our first brick and mortar location. Now, the problem with the brick and mortar location is that you need more employees to actually get things done. And I had to hire my first employee because I had run out of family members to employ. And his name was Tom. And Tom was a friend of my brother's. And he came in, and he was a nice enough guy, college student, philosophy major. And he tried his hardest. He really did. And raise a hand, how many people have worked in a restaurant in the room? Okay, so you know the environment. It's hot. It's fast-paced. It doesn't seem like a philosophy major would do really well there. And that is correct. I had never been a leader, though. I didn't know what it was like to hire and fire and train and get the right person in there. And so I had to let Tom go, which was a very awkward conversation. And as a philosophy major, he wanted to really break it down and talk about it. And I was like, please, Tom, just go. It's over. But all of a sudden, I had to replace Tom. And employee turnover is a huge, huge deal. If you were in here for the previous session, David broke down a lot of data. And I'm not here to pile more negative data onto you. You know, we are currently seeing, based on the previous session, where we're at as leaders of companies, okay? At the end of this session, you're going to have a roadmap to be able to combat the things that David talked about just a minute ago. On average, it costs 33% of an employee's salary to replace them. So I looked up the numbers here in Florida. If the average salary is $56,000, the cost to replace that person is around $18,000. That includes finding them, interviewing them, training them not working out after 90 days, firing them again, bringing them back in, and the whole process it takes to find the next right fit. And so as a barbecue restaurant owner, I wanted to grow, I wanted to scale, and honestly, I got tired of working 7 days a week and 100-hour weeks and all the things, and really, I was tired of washing dishes because as a restaurant owner, they don't tell you how many times you have to go in the dish pit and wash dishes. So I started looking around, and I found ChickfilA, right? ChickfilA is the gold standard when it comes to restaurant operations. And I found this quote while I was studying from Truett Cathy, the founder of ChickfilA, and he said, "Businesses don't succeed or fail, people do." And I think that's something we all know intuitively. And I think that we get so enamored with the day-to-day of our businesses that we forget that sometimes. You know, we want to serve customers, we want to help, we want to do all the things that we forget to take care of the people that are actually the ones out doing the thing that matters the most. And so I couldn't have another Tom happen. And so I tried to put a system in place. And so this is the system that I built. And because I'm a marketer now, I love alliteration, so it had to be a 3P system, the Peak Performance Pyramid. If you got a better name, please come up afterwards. I'm happy to rebrand. And anybody in the construction industry will tell you that if you're going to build a building, you better have the right foundation in place. And so that's where we're going to start. We're going to start by assembling your team. Now, some of you in here may already have a team. Some of you in here might be building your team. Maybe you have 1 or 2 employees. Maybe you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Some of you might have a couple hundred. This is applicable to everybody. You just need to sort of run this check internally and figure out where is it that you're at and where do you need to go from here. So we start with leadership, right? No team can really be formed until somebody leads that team. And the best story I have is from my Air Force days. Leadership is a complex topic. There's been hundreds and hundreds of books written on it. Anybody know who John C. Maxwell is, right? That dude's written 5,000 books on leadership, right? So it's a very broad topic, but I like to simplify things. I had a lieutenant in the Air Force. His name was Lieutenant Butler, and he was a really great guy. But as an airman, I was a young enlisted guy. We like to push the boundaries of things. We like to see what we could get away with. And as you can see by my face, I really hate shaving, which in the military does not fly. I was an Air Force guy. I know this is a Navy area, so I'm sorry for anybody that's on the wrong team. But I didn't like to shave, right? So we would push it, and we would let our hair grow out just a little bit too long. Lieutenant Butler would go out of his way to find us when we were doing that and correct us. And that doesn't seem like that big of a thing, right? It seems like, that's just somebody enforcing the rules, making things happen. But what stood out to me about Lieutenant Butler the whole time was that he held himself to such a high standard. There was never a hair out of place on his head. His uniform was always the crispiest. He was always in the office on time. He never missed a beat on anything. And I think if you boil leadership down to maybe one or two things, it's really, are you willing to do the things you're telling your people to do? And as long as you're doing that, you're probably on the right track, because leadership is complicated. You're going to have unique situations come up. But what is the simple thing you can pull away from each of those encounters? Are you doing the things that you're asking your people to do? Great leadership starts with the person in the mirror. So now that you're ready to lead, you got to know where you're going to take people, right? So we have to be able to cast vision. This guy's name is Yvon Chouinard, and Yvon was a big mountain climber back in the day. And they'd go up on these mountainsides, and they would drive these metal stakes into the mountain, and they would leave them there, and it sort of damages the rock face. And if you pull the stakes out, it leaves a giant hole. And what Yvon realized was like, oh, we're damaging the mountain for future generation climbers. And so he wanted to do something that would preserve it for future generations. And so he started a company. And some of you may have heard of it. It was Patagonia. And so Patagonia's big mission is to basically do environmental conservation. And they practice what they preach. It's this huge vision, and they've aligned their whole company to it, where 1% of their sales every year go to environmental causes. They will buy back any used Patagonia clothing. So I have a ratty Patagonia hat that I love because, it's worn in. But if I wanted to sell it back to them, I could. And they even have Yvon has recently come out and said that when he dies, he's donating his entire net worth to a nonprofit that is going to basically continue on with environmental conservation. And I'm not saying you have to be on this level of mission, but it is very clear what Yvon wants to do, and people that align with that vision are going to be naturally attracted to his team. So again, in the previous presentation, we saw that we're in a labor shortage now. Well, how do you actually compete? How do you stand out? Have a very clear vision for your company and where you're taking things, and all of a sudden that becomes a competitive advantage when you're recruiting. Great companies have really great visions. But what makes a great vision? I define vision as a North Star that is so big and out there that you'll never actually reach it. For Patagonia, their thing is to save the entire planet. It's going to be really hard for them to actually ever get there. But they're going to all strive for it. The vision should be so big that there's no way you actually get there. So then, once you have a vision, you need to get core values in place. And we've heard core values mentioned here a couple times, so I'm not going to belabor this point too much. But these are my co-founders for High Beam Marketing, my new business. I'm no longer in the barbecue restaurant. I no longer have to wash dishes on Saturdays. It's great. Ben and Austin here, and we are all three very different guys. I see the world one way, Ben and Austin see it in two different angles. So we need core values to keep us in line. It basically is a set of operating principles that when we come along and we see a situation that we don't have an actual rule for, we have a way to actually deal with it. And so how many of you have worked with a marketing company before and you feel like they basically stole your money, it was a waste of money, it didn't work out? Yeah, okay. I feel your pain. And that's because they love to overpromise and underdeliver. And so with High Beam Marketing, one of our core values ended up being test and iterate. And so when we get on a sales call with you, we always promise at a certain level, like, hey, we're going to come in. We think based on previous performance that we can do X, Y, and Z for you, but we're going to test it, and then we're going to iterate, and we're going to communicate the whole time. That is not a clear, fast rule that we have an operating procedure for when I get on a sales call that I do that. It's just every single time that it comes up, we're servicing a client that we've been in business with for 6 months, and all of a sudden something new comes along, they have a new idea, we say, okay, we'll test it, and then we'll iterate on it. Core values are just the way your people should act when no one else is around and no rules are there. They're the guide poles for every organization at all times. I personally like to have between 3 to 7. I think anything more than that, you sort of water them down. It's a lot harder to actually get people to buy in and to full on go for it. So, you're ready to lead. You have a big vision in place. You've got your core values lined up. Now, it's time to assemble your team. Or if you already have your team, it's time to put it back together. I want to hear some ideas here. What do you think the most important metric for any leader is? Shout them out. Confidence, retention. That's good. Integrity. Man, you guys must be at a personal development conference because these are way better than usually when I get. Usually I get like revenue, turnover, market share. Engaged listening. Yeah, see? Do you want to come up here? You could do this too. The most important metric, I think, for any leader is the percentage of people in your organization that are filled with the right seats, or the percentage of seats in your organization that are filled with the right people. And how do we define right people? So there's a checklist for this, and this comes from an author named Jim Collins. He wrote a couple books, Good to Great, How the Mighty Fall, and specifically this book was Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0. And he's got the key seat checklist. And number 1, this person has the power to make people decisions. It's a big deal. The example I use, if you look at the restaurant example from earlier, the dishwasher was a very important person because if the dish pit wasn't caught up with and it wasn't clean and like all those dishes weren't ready to go, then I couldn't make barbecue. We couldn't serve our customers. They'd have nothing to eat on. But the general manager of the restaurant could fire people, could hire people, could spend my money, could do a lot of things that would really have an outside impact on the organization. So it's probably more important to get the right GM in place first and then put the right dishwasher in place. Failure in the seat could expose the entire business. If the dishwasher fails, that's a bad night. If the GM fails, that's your business gone. And then success in the seat would have a major impact on company success. If the dishwasher shows up, that means I don't have to go in. That's great. But if the GM does it well, that means he's taking care of the dishwasher. He's making sure everything works, everything runs. If your company has less than 90% of your key seats filled with the right people, then you should probably stop everything until that is corrected. Because if you're a small business owner or a leader of a team and you feel like you have to work way too much, I guarantee you this is the problem. You don't have the right people around you that are actually able to go out and support you so that you can take some time off. So now we're moving up the ladder here, job security. There was something in the previous presentation that sort of rubbed me the wrong way in that compensation was talked about a little bit. And the reason why is that there was actually a study done that found, so if you look at that top bar there, that is the graph of basically satisfaction, happiness for people based on salary. So it goes up from $10,000 to $160,000. And I think this study was done in like 2010. And what they found was right around the $75,000 mark, people's happiness, there was a diminishing return on it. And what you should take away from that is that compensation isn't really the thing that will drive your business forward. You have to get people to a certain level of compensation where they can afford to live in the area that your business operates, they can afford to go to the grocery store, they can afford to do a lot of things, but if you don't compensate them at that level, you can't really expect too much more out of them than the very basics that the job is asking for. compensation doesn't move the needle that much. There was a company out on the West Coast called Gravity Payments that wanted to put this to the test. And so because of their business model, they were able to pay everyone in the organization a minimum of $75,000 a year. And this was back in 2010, so in 2023 dollars, that's basically $106,000. So thank you, inflation. And this is sort of what they determined was the amount somebody needed to really be able to live and be healthy and happy in the world. And they wanted to put it to a test. The CEO, he took his pay all the way down to $75,000 just to make sure it could happen for everybody. And the results were really staggering. If you saw that previous presentation, we have birth rates are down, home purchasing is down, everything is down. It is strictly tied to compensation numbers. Because this business, they found out their business revenue tripled, employee headcount went up 70%, number of customers doubled, and then on the personal side of things, the number of babies being born went up 10x, home purchases went up 10x, and 401k contributions were up 155%. It's amazing what happens in the economy when people have money to actually spend. It's not that we go out and buy $7 lattes, is that we go out and live our lives, and we leave our parents' house. I'm one of those, terrible millennial guys, and that's the thing that holds us back. It's just compensation. Now, again, as a former restaurant owner, I can't pay my dishwasher $75,000 a year, or $106,000 a year. It's just not realistic. But as a leader, I have to look at that position and go, I expect nothing more than clean dishes out of this dish pit, and that is it. And a lot of times leaders get in trouble when they look at that person and they go, why don't you believe in the mission? Why aren't you here 15 minutes early? Why aren't you here 20 minutes late? Why do you call out? And it's like, they're getting paid $15 an hour. You have to have a certain level of expectation there. Before we move on to the next thing, the thing I would recommend you focus on is the key seats in your organizations, those people that can make people decisions and business decisions and everything else. Make sure those people are compensated as highly as you can, because those are the people, again, that are going to take pressure off of you as the leader, the owner of the business, to be able to go do the thing. So once we have people compensated fairly, we need to make them feel safe. There was a study done by a group of Australian researchers. It was called the Bad Apple Study. And they took groups of college kids, and they put them in groups of 4, and they gave them simple business problems to solve. And the prize for winning was $100 for each of the participants. And when I was in college, $100 was a lot of money, so I would probably have signed up. These guys were highly motivated for this. But what they didn't know was that one of the 4 participants in the study was a plant. This guy was there to be a bad apple, a bad actor. And this guy was either, he was lazy, he was a jerk, or he was a pessimist. So lazy guy, he would just lay his head on the table, he'd just look at his phone the whole time. Pessimist guy was like, you're dumb, this is dumb, everybody's dumb. And then the jerk was like, it's my idea or the highway. And you guys are dumb for not following my ideas. And what they found was really, it was the opposite of what they really expected to find, because there was this thought beforehand that group pressure would bring people up. So if you were positive in a group, people would rise up to that. But what they found was it's easier to pull people down than to actually pull them up. And the exception to this rule was there was one group where a guy, they had the same plant, but then they had a guy that was a former diplomat's son, so he had some leadership ability in him. He's 19, 20 years old. He had a little bit different life experience than most of the college kids in the groups had had. And this guy took charge. He ended up actually leading the group, and the jerk would do something in the group, say something negative. The diplomat's son would say, okay, I hear that, and then he would ask the rest of the group how they felt about it. He created psychological safety for the team to participate, and that group did just as well as every other control group that didn't have a jerk in it. And it was strictly because somebody was willing to step up and lead and make a team feel psychologically safe. And really, at the end of the day, you have 2 jobs as a leader. You have to coach up or coach out, which is a fancy way of saying fire, your bad apples in your team. And then you have to find a way to create that psychological safety. And I find that there's 5 really good ways to do that. Number 1, clearly define what winning in the job looks like. Yesterday morning, the first speaker talked about the giant backpack, right? And like your A players get more and more and more, and all of a sudden they have job scope creep and compensation has stayed flat, and all of a sudden they're burnt out. Clearly define on a quarterly basis what winning looks like for your team. Praise in public, reprimand in private. Back to the Lieutenant Butler story from earlier. I would definitely push the issues on facial hair. He never called me out once in public. He would always come up to my desk in private and just sort of whisper to me and ask me to go clean up and shave, or he'd pull me into his office and ask me to do it, but he never did it in public. And I trusted him, and I respected him for that. And also, I'm telling that story like I kept doing that for years. That was like the first month and a half, and then I stopped. I learned. Number 3, and this is huge. I know you're busy. I know you got a lot going on, but you need to schedule and actually show up to your one-on-one meetings. Raise a hand who's guilty, and it's me too. Who's missed a one-on-one meeting, who's pushed a one-on-one meeting, or worse off, been late to a one-on-one meeting with a person. Yeah. As soon as you do that, you tell the person what's important to you, and it's whatever else you've got going on, it's not them. And all those little relationship investments, they add up over time. Number 4, always be listening. Right here in the front row, we talked about that was a key metric for the leader. Always be listening. Are you talking 80% of the time, or are you listening 80% of the time? And number 5 is walk the floor. I've got another great military story about this. This is Colonel Daniels and me at my first barbecue restaurant location. And Colonel Daniels was the leader of our squadron. Every single morning before work would start, he'd come around about 8 a.m. and he'd walk the entire floor. There's about 50 or 60 people in the organization. And he'd go desk by desk by desk by desk, and he did this Monday through Friday, desk by desk by desk by desk, and say, hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? And he would know things about people, and he'd ask about it, and he would find a way to get one-on-one time with people that he never had one-on-one time with. And he because of that, I felt like I could trust the guy, and I could rely on him for stuff. And so one day he came up to me, and he said, how are we doing today, Airman Lyles? Face looks nice and shaven. That's good. How are you doing? How are you doing? And I said, sir, to be honest with you, it was a little bit of a rough morning. We had a little bit of a laundry situation at the dorm, but I think they're working on it. I don't know. In military dorms, they're okay, but there's always something breaking in them. He said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me know if you need anything. And I was like, yes, sir. And of course, I'm not going to tell the colonel, hey, can you get my washer fixed? That'd be great. He disappeared. 4 or 5 hours later, the senior master sergeant in the office, the top enlisted guy, he comes up to me and he goes, hey, Airman Lyles, just want to let you know, I called the dorm manager, that washing machine's fixed, you're good to go. Colonel had heard what I said, gone and found the senior, because I wasn't going to complain. That was the way it was as an enlisted guy, low enlisted guy on the base. It just was what it was. But he went, found a way to do that, and here I am, 12 years later, still telling that story, and I remember it just like it happened yesterday. Those little things add up. They matter. And that creates loyalty in your organization. And so you want to stop having people leave for silly reasons. Find a way to stack stories like this with them. Make it really, it should be a really emotional event when somebody wants to leave your team or has to leave your team. They should love it that much. And the cool thing is you as the leader get to control that. It's just an effort thing. It's just an activity thing. So, fair enough. We've poured into our people. We set the foundation. We got job security for them. We created a safe team. We've invested in them. Now it's time to assemble the team and really build it. So there's 5 stages of team building, and this comes from a psychologist, and his name's blanking me right now. Anybody know it? No? Forming, storming, norming, performing, and transforming. This guy was not a marketer, but he did like rhyming. And you can see there, and then you think about your teams and the way you guys have people come together and all the things, and it feels chaotic, and then all of a sudden it feels like things have settled down, and then you're like, man, we could do anything. We're crushing it, da-da-da. That is what's happening. This is exactly what's happening. In stage 1, your team is forming. Your initial assembly, everyone is on their best behavior, right? The weirdness in you hasn't come out yet. The weirdness in them is still hidden. And there's this weird sense of optimistic uncertainty in the group. It's like, I've hired this new person. they're the answer to all the problems. We're going to be golden. It's the honeymoon period, right? So then you start to storm. All of a sudden, that perfect person starts to have opinions. They've got something to say. They want to argue with you. There's a hierarchy that begins to form in the team because leadership isn't about position, right? It's about influence. And so you can have somebody on the team that's the lowest paid person in the room, but they got the most influence, and they're the one that leads that team, not you. And teams in this moment have a high potential for conflict because nobody really knows each other yet. You still don't really trust each other. And your job as the leader is to know these stages, know where your team is in these stages, and sort of shepherd people through. So then you get to the norming part. Team starts to settle into a little bit of a rhythm. You start to respect each other's strengths, and you're able to mitigate each other's weaknesses, right? It's the basketball team that starts to be able to pass the ball, anticipate things. Things are starting to click, and then you get to the best part ever when the team's just humming and performing. Everything's starting to mature, performance is crushing it, goals are easily obtained, no problems, you're moving on, boom, 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 boom. And then something happens, the team transforms again. Somebody gets hired and added on, you go back to the forming stage. Somebody quits, you go back to the forming stage. Somebody gets fired, you go back to the forming stage. Anytime there's a change in the team, somebody gets promoted, back to the forming stage. And you repeat this cycle over and over and over again. And you as the leader should be reflecting and preparing for the cycle to begin again. So if you're hiring somebody new, know that you're going back to the forming stage. Have meetings in place for team building. Have meetings in place for everybody to get to know each other. Find a way to get lunch together. Those little things start to add up, and it's your job as the leader, again, to shepherd everybody through this stage. And you can see that over time, if you stay committed to it, your performance goes up. Now, I'm very optimistic in general, and so this only goes up, but we've definitely seen plenty of businesses where the performance goes down because as you're getting into that storming stage, let's say the gossip starts to run wild and the infighting starts to run wild, and you as the leader just, abdicate responsibility and you don't get involved with it and you don't want to mess with it. And what happens over time? Down and down and down and down. So, if you as the leader can come in and make sure you're walking these 5 stages and you're leading everybody through it, your team will get better and perform better over time. I hear you. I heard the mumbling and the grumbling. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to be a leader. It's a lot of work to build teams. Yeah, you should hate being a leader some days. Like it's not fun. It's not just fancy parking spots and great compensation and all that. It is a burden a lot of times. But I think great leaders are called to it. I really think great leaders can't help but lead. And you can probably trace that thread all the way back to your childhood. You're just born that way. And so it's better for you to invest in this stuff. It's better for you to embrace it as an identity and to actually own it and own the hard work and take pride in the fact that you are a leader and that you're building an A+ team. That's something to be proud of. So is it worth it? Well, here's the scoreboard. We find that your employees at high-trust companies that are being led well will experience 74% less stress. For you, they'll be 50% more productive. They'll have 106% more energy at work, which makes sense because if you're going into work and you're like, I got to deal with Fred again, I'm not going to crank out those emails for you, Sarah. Like it's going to, I got Fred over here breathing down my back. I'm sorry, you're only going to have a decrease in sick days by 13%. Apparently, diseases don't care about team building. But you will have 76% more engagement, and a big one here, 40% less burnout, because everybody will be happy to come into work. There's still going to be hard days. There's still going to be great days. 40% less burnout. I mean, sign me up. So you as a leader could stop right here. You could build your pyramid, your peak performance pyramid, to team building and stop. And you would have a better organization than 80% of the companies in Pensacola. But if you can get these last 2 right, this is where it transforms to people don't leave for $1 more an hour. They don't leave for a 20% raise. They don't leave. They just don't leave. And if they do have to leave, it's an emotional thing because they are so bought into the team and what we're doing that they don't want to go. So they start with individual growth. Once teams begin to perform at high levels, the individual will inevitably begin to wonder, what's next for me? As humans, we don't like to plateau. We get used to things, and then we start to get bored, and then we atrophy, and then that's, again, downward cycle. So people are going to look for what's next for me. So you, in your one-on-one meetings that we're no longer missing and we're no longer late for and we're going to actually be in, we're going to have a coaching graph here where we say, okay, here's where you are, Fred or Sarah, and here's how you go up and to the right, okay? And this had one typo on it. The top left there is supposed to say some sort of like degenerate genius. Like you're basically, you're like, we trust you a lot, but you're not very good at your job. An interesting question is, what percentage of your organization right now is in the top right? I'd say the middle box and up and to the right, like those top 4 right. I bet you think right now about that person who is a bad hire, that either needs to be coached up or coached out. But what this graph does is it gives us a very clear roadmap for people to go, hey, if you want to be a star, if you want to be compensated like a star, I'm going to be honest with you. You're a core player right now, and you're doing really, really good. But here's 5 things you got to do in the next quarter to move. But your job as the leader is to cast that vision for that person and to give them a clear plan. And again, one-on-one meetings are a great time to provide that feedback and coaching. I put this slide in here because I cannot stress enough how important one-on-one time with every person on your team is. If your team's too big, like that's a leadership problem, you need to have a whole nother layer of leadership below you. But if you have 5 to 10 direct reports, you can make time as a leader to have one-on-one meetings with them every single week where they do 80% of the talking and you do 80% of the listening. And your 20% of talking should really only be to ask further questions. And then at the very end, you say, okay, based on everything you've said and everything you've told me you want out of your life and your career here are the 5 things I suggest you do to go up and to the right on that performance graph. This is a clear roadmap. Every organization needs a clear roadmap, right? Panda Express shows you exactly what you need to do to move up in their organization. When you come in as a dishwasher there, it's very clear what you got to do to get to a general manager. Very clear. You guys saw the Buc-ee's graph on the last session? That's another great example of a clear roadmap of, hey, if you come in here and you're a chief brisket cutter, you can then become a GM over time. I have a weird thing with Buc-ee's brisket, like as a former barbecue guy. It's like, is it that good? I don't know. No? Yes. Who's my new best friend down here? Yes, you. So ask yourself this question: does your organization have a clear growth plan for every position inside the business? Because if you don't, that person is going to eventually look for what's next for them. And if you don't give them the clear roadmap, guess where they're going to go look? They're going to do that terrible thing that all of us millennials do, and God help the Gen Zers that are coming along because they're next. They're going to job hop. And you're going to be mad at them for job hopping because that's not how it was back in your day or whatever, right? Like, you got to give them a plan. Your job. You're the leader. You give them a plan. And the last thing here is, it's the hardest thing to do because you have to align that person's purpose in life with how your business makes money. And this ties into this whole graph and everything we've been talking about here, and it ties into the vision your company cast, but you've got to find a way to connect these things if you can. You got to find a way. There's a story I heard one time. The University of Michigan has a call center where they would call alumni to get donations for future scholarship recipients. And call centers, I never worked in one, but from what I've seen, are brutal environments. Crazy amount of turnover, tons of rejection. It's just not a very great situation. So they hired this organizational psychologist and author, Adam Grant, to come in and try to help them. And Adam comes in and he looks around and he goes, okay, we're going to start trying some things, and some things do work and don't work. And they try some like trophies, back to the compensation piece. They're like, all right, we'll give you more money. We'll give you more glory. We'll give you something. And none of that worked. What ended up working was they found a few of the scholarship recipients and they asked them to come in and do a very brief 5-minute speech to the whole team and say, I'm one of the recipients. My grandparents went here, they met here, and I was never going to be able to afford to come here. And because of the work you do, I was able to come in, and now I'm living my dream as a student at the University of Michigan. It's not my dream. I'm a Georgia Bulldog fan, but to some people. They did that, and you would think okay, 10, 20, 30% growth in revenue would be amazing. They experienced, over the next 60, 90 days, 170% growth in revenue, just because everyone in the building all of a sudden was able to connect what they were doing for why they were there. They connected the organization's profit to their internal purpose. If you can do that, you'll end up with an employee who won't leave, again, for a marginal raise or promotion, but instead is going to want to stay with you for the long run. So back to Chick-fil-A. I have a love-hate relationship with Chick-fil-A because as a former restaurant owner myself, they just kicked my butt every single day, and I'm a competitive guy. I hated losing, but I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot from Truett Cathy's books and Dan Cathy, his son. And while I was listening to a podcast one time, they were saying this story, and it's what I want to leave you guys with today. Chick-fil-A in the early 90s was about a $250 million a year business, pretty good sized business, but not a McDonald's, nothing crazy like that yet. And there was this Boston chicken company that was getting all this publication and all this press and all this praise in the Northeast, and Chick-fil-A started to get a little worried about it. They're competitive. They're like, who's this other chicken chain that's coming in here trying to mess with us? And they dispense Truett Cathy's son, Dan Cathy. They send him up to the Northeast, and he does some recon and checks them out, and he goes, okay. And he figures out what they're doing and sees what they can do to compete at the Chick-fil-A team. And so he comes back, and he's ranting and raving, and he's saying, hey, we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to do this, and we got to do that. And Truett Cathy's just at the end of the table, just sort of tapping his pen. And then all of a sudden, as Dan is trying to paint this big vision, Truett slams the table. And he says, tired of hearing all this talk about getting bigger. We need to get better. If we get better, customers will demand that we get bigger. When I heard that, that hurt. Because for me, as a business guy and an entrepreneur and a competitive guy, I'm very into what's next. How do we grow? How do we grow? How do we grow? This humbled me. When I heard it for the first time, I was really humbled, and I was like, oh, we have to get better, and then we'll get bigger. And if you want to get better as an organization, and you want to get bigger, frankly, because that means more customers and more revenue and more all of the things, you can't serve all of your customers. Who does that? Your team does that. And so if you want to get bigger, if you want to get better, if you want to go somewhere that you've never been before, the Peak Performance Pyramid will take you there. Thank you, guys.